The moment baby Orion opened his eyes, the delivery room seemed to freeze. There was something unnatural in his gaze. Not eerie, just knowing. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating stories. Like he had arrived not just to live, but to witness. The nurses exchanged glances, unsure what they had just seen. Newborns cried, flailed, whimpered. Orion stared. His mother, Amara, lay pale and trembling in the hospital bed, clutching her husband Rowan's hand as tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't even know yet if her baby had made it. The delivery had been brutal. Her body had nearly given up, her heart slowing dangerously during the last hour. All she remembered was the cold panic on the doctors' faces and the blinding white of the surgical lights. Rowan could barely stand as the nurse approached with the small, quiet bundle. He's okay," he asked, his voice a cracked whisper. The nurse nodded, gently placing the baby in his arms. "He's strong, quiet, and very alert." Rowan held Orion for the first time. The baby's dark, steady eyes met his, not past him, into him. He shivered. 3 years earlier, Amara brushed dust off another negative pregnancy test and stared at the bathroom mirror, her reflection hollow. Another month. Another hope lost. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable, but his eyes filled with the same pain she tried to bury. "We'll try again," he said gently, but his voice lacked conviction. Years of failed IVF, hormone injections, and emotional landmines had left their marriage frayed. Still together, still in love, but barely breathing. Then, the miracle happened. No procedure, no doctor's visit, just a late period, and 2 pink lines. "I think I'm pregnant," she whispered that night, trembling. Rowan froze, blinking like he'd misheard. "Really?" Amara nodded, tears falling. And just like that, after 4 years of heartbreak, their journey began again. But miracles, as they learned, were not easy things. By the 12th week, Amara was on bed rest. Bleeding, contractions, pain. At 22 weeks, she was hospitalized. At 29, her water broke. And at 31 weeks, under the blaze of surgical lamps, Orion was born. The doctors called him premature. The nurses called him resilient, but neither label felt quite right. Amara's first glimpse of her son came 2 days later in the NICU, her body still healing, her heart terrified. Orion lay in the incubator, tiny, pink, and silent. But his eyes, those eyes, they locked on hers like magnets. And he didn't look away. The first year, most babies cry, scream, demand. Orion observed. He barely fussed. He responded to voices, turned his head to sounds, and tracked movement with eerie focus. At 6 weeks, he followed Amara's face with his eyes. At 2 months, he reached for Rowan's hand when he walked into the room, not randomly, but intentionally. At 3 months, he mimicked sounds, not baby gibberish, sounds. Amara tested it one night. "Moon," she said gently, holding a picture book. "Ma'am," Orion said, blinking. Rowan sat forward. Did he just? I think he did. By 6 months, Orion wasn't just babbling. He was repeating sounds with uncanny clarity. He never cried without reason. He didn't throw tantrums. And when he looked at you, it felt like you were being measured. The trouble with brilliance. By age 2, Orion could spell his name with blocks. At 3, he could read. Not just letters. Read. Books became his world. Colors, numbers, shapes. He absorbed them like air. Rowan tried to joke about it. "We're raising a little professor," he'd say. But Amara wasn't laughing. She had read enough to know this wasn't just giftedness. It was something else. Something unexplainable. One day, at a family picnic, a group of kids tried to play with Orion. He just stood there, watching them. When one child tossed him a ball, Orion let it fall to the grass. "It doesn't make sense," he said quietly. "What doesn't?" Amara asked, kneeling beside him. "The game. It has no structure. No goal." He was 3. Isolation. Preschool was a disaster. Orion's intelligence terrified the teachers and alienated the other children. One day, a classmate asked him what a triangle was. "An equilateral triangle has all 3 sides equal, and each angle measuring 60 degrees, he answered. The other kids laughed. "He talks funny," one boy shouted. Orion's face didn't change. But that night, Amara found him curled under his bed. "Why don't they like me?" he asked, voice muffled by the blanket. Her heart broke. They pulled him out the next day. A new world at home. Homeschooling wasn't a solution. It was salvation. Rowan adjusted his job. Amara built lesson plans. But most of the time, Orion taught himself. Numbers became patterns. Language became music. At 5, he started drawing schematics. At 6, he built a rudimentary solar panel using scraps from the garage. Then the headaches started. Short blackouts. Eyes fluttering. Stiffness. The first episode was terrifying. He collapsed during a quiet afternoon. Just dropped. Pencil clattering from his hand. The doctors ran tests. Scans. EEGs. The neurologist sat them down. Orion's brain is operating at a cognitive speed far beyond normal parameters, but his body can't keep up. These blackouts, they're shutdowns. His brain is trying to protect itself from burning out. Amara's hands shook. "Are you saying he's hurting himself by being smart?" "In a way, yes," the doctor replied. "If we don't regulate his neurological load, he could suffer permanent damage." The intervention. Medication, downtime, creative therapies, structured non-thinking hours. It all felt backward, like telling a bird not to fly. But they tried, because the alternative was worse. At first, Orion rebelled. He didn't understand. He cried for the first time in months. "I don't want my mind to be quiet," he whispered. Rowan pulled him close. "You won't lose your light. We're just protecting the flame." Slowly, it worked. The shutdown stopped. The headaches faded, and the brilliance returned. Steadier, stronger. But this time, Orion was in control. The spark. At 7, he designed a prototype for an energy storage unit, a battery that was 5 times more efficient than any on the market. Rowan sent the design to a former professor, Dr. Elsie Granger, a leading energy physicist. She called back within hours. "Where did this come from?" "My son. He's in high school." "No, he's 7. Silence. "Can I meet him?" The beginning of a legacy. Dr. Granger became Orion's mentor. She invited him to a special think tank program for young minds. Not a school, a laboratory of potential. At first, Amara and Rowan were hesitant, but Orion was ready. At 8, he stood before a team of researchers and presented his battery concept. At 9, he filed a provisional patent. News outlets got wind. They called him the boy who thinks in light. But Orion never let it go to his head, because he still remembered what it felt like to be alone on a playground, to be seen as strange. At 10 years old, one night, as they watched a meteor shower, Amara asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He turned to her, eyes gleaming like the sky above. "Useful. Useful. To the world." She smiled and held him close. "You already are." Final narration, voiceover style. Sometimes the most extraordinary minds are born not just to think, but to feel. To remind us that brilliance is not cold or arrogant, but quiet, intentional, and deeply human. Orion didn't want fame. He didn't want attention. He wanted to understand, to fix things, to help. And maybe that's what makes him truly remarkable. Because in a world that never stopped shouting, he was the boy who listened. And one day, he would change everything.